Hi guys, and welcome to the long overdue video that I promised you all for the TBC TSM setup from a fresh install guide. Now, first off, I do want to apologise for the length of time it's been since that I promised this video for it to be coming out, but it is here now, and it is hopefully going to answer all your questions on everything you need to know for setting up TSM with a fresh install or from a pre-existing profile so that you can make a fortune in TBC. Now, just before we dive in, the only things that we will not be covering today is the absolute basics, such as installing the add-on or getting the app helper sorted out. And this is because of the fact that I have covered this in previous videos, as well as a couple of the more intricate details of some of the operations and things like that, that simply if I put them in this video would make this video substantially too long, and it's not really what I think you guys are interested in. So if it is what you're looking for, I will link to videos that I've done in the past down below that cover those topics. But today we're just going to be going straight in and having a look at our setup for how we have our groups and operations set up for the TBC expansion. So let's dive into it. So, our groups, and this is the part that a lot of people are unsure how they want to have set up when it comes to their TSM profiles, and there is no right or wrong way to do this, and that is the first thing that I want to cover right there, right up front. This is something that you generally have how you like, and it's something that a lot of people simply will be able to do different things depending on the characters they have available to be able to make the money, and that's going to dictate what works best for you in terms of how you have your setup for your groups. Now, how I have it here is that I have these main categories, as you can see: my gathering materials, my primals, my professions, and my random junk. Now, that's what works for me. And then we break down into subgroups from there that we'll go through in just a second. But if this doesn't work for you, that's fine, don't you worry about it. We're going to go over why I have it the way that I do, as well as also have links to all of these groups, or at least a slightly older version now for all of these groups, and we'll discuss why that is as well in a paste bin down in the description below for you. So check that out if you're interested. But like I just alluded to, we have got a slightly updated version in the video to what you are going to see in the links down below, very slightly. And that's due to a concept that I want you all to accept right now, and that is that you're never going to have these groups perfect. They are going to evolve over time, such as, for example, when a new phase of the expansion comes out and new items become available to be crafted with your professions. You're going to want to be adding those into your professions groups, of course. Or say, for example, a particular item that you were flipping in large quantities just becomes less viable, so maybe you want to take it out of a high priority group and into something that's a little bit more relaxed, so you're not going to be wasting fortunes on buying materials that you're not going to be using. To that end, you'll notice as we're looking in here, I have my groups organised into Old World and TBC when you eventually get down to their final subgroup categories. Before that, in my gathering materials, I have them broken down into the type of materials. So we have cloth, herbs, leather, ore, and random, which is pretty much what I use for anything that I pick up with mining or stuff that's used for crafting that is a drop from mobs, things like that. Cloth, fairly self-explanatory. Herbs, leather, and ore, all gathered from their appropriate gathering profession, of course. And just so you are aware, if you are going to be using these groups from the description below, the majority of them are fairly well covered, and I have moved pretty much everything as it needs to be. But the cloth group is not quite, and I think some of these randoms, anything that says random on it, we'll talk a little bit about later on, but essentially they are going to be groups for things that you don't really know what to do with, and you just want to not have anything ungrouped in your bag, so you just throw it into one of these randoms that you don't really care about, just to get it out of the way. But that's the gathering materials group. We'll move over into our primals now, which is as simple as we have all of the primals in this group. So our primal air, earth, fire, life, mana, might, nether, shadow, and water. Nether I've got in there right now, even though it's banned on pickup, because I do believe at a later phase it's going to go to BOE. And then in a subgroup we simply have the moats. Moving on from there, we've got our professions. Now, professions is going to be one of the most or least used groups by you guys watching this video, depending on what professions you have available to you and just how much you like to farm comparative to craft for your various different gold making strategies. But in here, you'll find that I have a profession tab for each profession that I use to make gold. If there isn't one here, it's because I don't personally like to use it. But in here, you will find that we have almost everything broken down into ways that works for me. So in our alchemy, we have our old world crafts that we can make, our TBC crafts, and then in TBCs, I have it broken down into ones and stacks, depending on how much of the items I'm going to want to make. We'll touch a little bit more on that later when we talk about our operations. Blacksmithing, much the same. We don't have an old world. By all means, feel free to make one if you would like to do so. But I simply feel that there isn't an awful lot to be made, maybe a few of the rods that can make you some money in the TBC expansion from the old world crafts, but that's about it. It's just not something I personally recommend going into, so I haven't got it there for you. But if you want to make one, by all means do so. Similarly, we've got our cooking, we've got things crafted in the old world and things crafted in TBC. Much the same with engineering. Then moving to jewel crafting, where of course everything was added in TBC, there was no old world. And then I also have all of the gems, which is where you're going to make the majority of your money with jewel crafting, split into their colour, as well as the ring and necklace groups in there as well. And going on further down, we get through our leatherworking and our tailoring. And then our final group that we have available in the link below is going to be our random junk. Now this is, as it sounds, random junk. I like to keep this group available simply because it's going to be helpful for any of you who level alts. Simply put, you're going to get a lot of things that don't really fit into any of these categories that you are going to want to sell. I put things in here like the Green Hills of Stranglethorn that sell quite well and well worth putting up if you're just going to have it do it automatically for you. Malachite actually needs to be moved. And then some BOE blues and purples from the old world now that are just not going to sell that well. I like to throw them into here as well. And then I sub this category out into sell fast in ones and sell fast in stacks. Basically, is it something that I'm going to sell at a low price in a one or something in a stack? Easy as that. Now, moving on, we're going to take a look at operations. Okay, so moving over into our operations, we're going to go through only the auctioning, the crafting, mailing, and shopping operations, because these are the ones that are going to be the primaries that you need to have set up in order to be able to make yourself some decent money at a basic level with TBC TSM. Now, we're going to talk about auctioning first because that is the one that's got the most to it, although it's probably also one of the simplest, and that is going to be that we're only really going to care about our posting tab here. And I have four groups: cheap stacks, cheap ones, and stacks. And as I'm sure you can tell by differentiation, the ones are going to be sold in stacks of one, and stacks are going to be as high as I have available to me. And then whether it's cheap or not is just going to dictate the price. So when it comes to our stacks, I have it set, every auction I do is set to 24 hours. I don't like to put anything on for more than that because you are going to get undercut if you put it on for 2 days. You can go shorter if you want, but 24 hours seems to work quite well for me simply because it accommodates my playtime, as well as not overdoing it to be undercut. I have my post cap set to limit and stack size set to limit, but I do allow partial stacks, so basically whatever I've got, it's going to throw it up. And then I do have a maximum number of expires for my cheap stacks, because if it's worth absolutely nothing and it's not selling, there's no point in me wasting my money reposting on the auction house fees when I can just then go and vendor it, because that's clearly going to be the best thing to do, and I'll consider removing it from the group that it's in. Now when it comes to price, I always set my bid percentage at 100% of buyout because I do not like bidding as a concept. I don't like to not know how much I'm going to get for an item. And I always have my undercut amount set to 1 copper because you only really want to go to the top of the list. You don't really care about crashing the market. Now, beyond that, when it comes to my cheap operations, we have 65% DB market for minimum price, 200% for maximum, and 100% for normal. If you want to use some more complicated things than simply DB market value, which I don't really like myself because DB market is a pretty all-round excellent different metric to use. But if you do want to change this, then by all means do so. I do have a video that goes into a lot of detail on the various different settings you can use for your prices. But this is my basic guide on basic setup, so this is what we're going to have. 65% DB market minimum, and when below minimum, we're going to post at minimum when it comes to our cheap things, because we just want to get it up on the auction house, because hopefully if it's up, it'll sell. When it comes to our maximum, and we are above it, we post at maximum price. We want to try and get as best value as we can, but we don't want to rob ourselves of sales, so we'll try and get double money. and hope for the best. Normal price, as I'm sure a lot of you have set normally, is going to be 100% DB market because that's the normal price to have for your normal price. Easy as that. Now, when it comes to our cheap ones, you're going to be looking much the same, well, exactly the same, apart from your post cap and stack size. When we move over to our ones, however, from there, we do not have a maximum amount of expires, because if it's worth selling with this operation, it's worth waiting for the sale. Similarly, our minimum price, we've taken up to 85% because we don't want to rob ourselves on a particularly high value item. I don't mind going down as far as 85% because that's just personally where I set my own limit for where I'm happy in terms of the money I receive for an item. My maximum price, I'm more willing to go up to a higher value because generally, like I said, this is the operation I use for high value items. And then my normal price is going to be 110% DB market. This is mainly because I feel as though a lot of the markets I get into, on the realms that I play, I am the majority of the market. So if I can set my normal price to be 110% of DB market, it means that I can manipulate the market values so that anyone else using TSM is highly likely to have this market be at a higher price because of the actions that I've taken. Moving over again to our final one then, not much to talk about in our stacks because it's basically a combination of what you saw in cheap stacks and what we've just discussed in our ones for our prices and the reasoning behind it. So moving on, we'll have a look at our crafting. I only really use the two groups here, and they're going to tell you what they're going to do pretty much by the name: restock to 20 and restock to 3. Now, the only thing that is going to differ is the restock quantity, so we'll talk about the rest first. And that's pretty much just going to be the minimum amount of profit really on this, which I have set to 130% of crafting cost. I don't mind crafting anything if it's going to give me a small amount of profit regardless of the actual value, as long as I'm churning over an actual profit. So if it's cheap to sell but it's also cheap to craft, I won't make it. When it comes to what we're crafting and however, and the amounts that we are crafting them in, we have our minimum restock quantity of 5 for our restock to 20 group. So if I already have 17 of them, it's not going to make 3. I've got it set so that it will only make a very minimum of 5 to get us up to this 20 aim. And 20 is the maximum limit I ever want to craft. Similarly with my restock to 3, I only ever want to craft up to 3 of them. And it will individually craft 1 at a time if that's what I have a need for. Now, my mailing operation, I have set my banking character. I like to name it banking character so I don't get confused. And then the target character name, if you're using these operations, you are just going to want to change that to the name of your banking character. Beyond there, I don't like to keep any amounts of any items. I just want everything that is using this mailing operation simply to shift over here. If you do prefer, you can also just change the target character in the default mailing operation and use that as well. And then finally, my shopping operations, which I don't really use a great deal of, in truth. I prefer to gather things for myself, or if I am buying them, I buy them through the use of the crafting menus, which sort of supersedes these shopping operations. But when I do occasionally run a shopping scan, I am essentially just looking for absolute dirt cheap bargains. So anything that is in a group that I'm willing to search for my shopping operations on, I'm looking for anything that's half price. Easy as that. I always have it set to not show anything above the maximum price because I don't want to rob myself, with no maximum restock quantity. If it's cheap enough, then I will buy it. So with all that out the way, we're going to move on to our final section, which is going to be how we appropriately use these operations with regards to the groups that they tie into. Okay, so the final thing we're going to talk about is how to appropriately match up these operations to your various groups, assuming you are using the groups and operations that I am using, or if you just want a gist of my logic for how I do it if you are making your own groups or your own operations. Now, really simple, straight off the bat, is going to be shopping and mailing operations. Every single group I have here is going to use the bargains and banking character operations. I want everything posted to my bank character that fits any of these groups, and I want everything to be on the bargain buys that I'm looking for. This is because when I'm going shopping, these bargains are going to be so rare. I want as much opportunity to get something good into my bank for a low amount of gold as possible, and I want everything simply to be sold on my banking character. If there's any reason that I want something on another character, it's so few and far between that I will either be able to do it manually and send what I need, or I'm going to be using the crafting menu and the tasks list feature of TSM to be able to send things via that methodology. If you want more information on that, then of course check out my crafting video down in the description below. Moving on from that, however, we're going to have crafting and our auctioning operations. And I'm using the gathering materials because it's the easiest one to show you how this works, in my opinion. So anything that I have that is an old world vanilla based item, I have currently selling in my cheap stacks operation that we discussed before, because these things aren't going to sell as well anymore now that TBC's out. It's just not. So I just want to get it in and get it out for a profit as quick as possible, so it's up there on the cheap stacks. Anything else that is a TBC item, I am going to be selling in stacks in the gathering materials, because of course you're going to be getting things that stack in large quantities, because that's the nature of gathering materials, so I'm going to go for stacks. And it's also the most desirable items in the game currently that fit into that category, so we're going to want to try and get our money's worth out of it. Similarly, when we come to primals, you're going to be looking at exactly the same. The only thing that's going to differ is going to be our professions. Now, I haven't actually got any of my professions up and running yet, which is why you'll see that all of them are currently not using the appropriate crafting operations, because I don't want to confuse TSM when I don't have the ability to craft any of these items. So I have got my TBC alchemy stuff set up, because that is the next profession that I will be leveling. And I have it set so that any items that are going to be crafted in stacks obviously use the restock to 20 feature, because if I'm going to be making items that can stack, I'm going to want to make them into their appropriate stacks, which is usually 20. And then I might wish to sell them in smaller stacks, but at least then I'll have a nice round figure to be able to sell them in whatever amount I think is going to be the best option. And then I'm going to have my things that sell in ones, I'm going to restock to 3, because I don't ever like to have a single item available, because then if it sells, then I have nothing up on the auction house if another potential buyer were to come along as well, and I feel that 3 is just a nice value to have for these larger items. You will of course find that some professions tend to lead themselves more in one direction than the other. So for example, alchemy, the majority of the items are going to be stacks items as opposed to individual. And then if you move into blacksmithing, you're going to be able to find that you're going to have a lot of things that are crafted into individual groups. I haven't actually finished separating these into the appropriate things, because of course, like I've just alluded to, I do not yet have the appropriate professions. But when I do, anything that I feel is a decent seller, like maybe these fell steel items I've heard good things about, we'll move into these ones, and that's blacksmithing is going to be very much ones heavy. Beyond that, it is really very much down to your personal preference in terms of how you go about doing your crafting and what your strategies are on the auction house, but that is how I like to set up. And I think that's going to about do it for this very quick guide on how to have your appropriate TSM setups for the beginning of TBC. Like I said, everything that is usable, such as the groups and the operations, I will have in the links down in the description below, as well as my other TSM videos, so feel free to check those out as well. All links down in the description. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Later.